At 67, I believed I had survived every heartbreak and loss life could hand me. How wrong I was, as you'll soon see. One violent afternoon, a tornado ripped apart the house in Maple Ridge, Kansas, where I had raised my son and kept every trace of my late husband's life. When I drove, trembling, to my son Evan's doorstep hoping for shelter and an embrace, the words that greeted me cut sharper than any wind: "We need privacy. My girlfriend doesn't want you here. My name is Pauline Mercer, and if you stay with me through this, you'll find this isn't just a tale of ruins. It's a story about love finding its way back when you least expect it." After my own family slammed the door in my face, I reached for something I had carried for half a century. A faded card with the name of my very first love, Graham Ellison, tucked inside a pocket. No one knew I still kept it, and I certainly never imagined I would ever call. Yet there I was, alone in a borrowed car with 3 garbage bags at my feet, dialing a number that felt like a relic from another life. The man who answered was more than a memory, he was living a full life, his voice steady and familiar from our high school days. When he pulled up and found me standing in that parking lot with nothing left, he looked at me and quietly said 3 words that shifted everything: "You look beautiful." That Tuesday began like 100 others, mundane and ordinary, and I was in my kitchen in Maple Ridge making tea around 3 in the afternoon, the way I always did. The forecast had warned of storms, common enough in Kansas that I barely felt alarmed, but this time the sky took on a strange, sickly green, streaked with black, and something in my chest clenched with fear I couldn't shake. At 3:15 the sirens began, their keening voice cutting through the calm of my small house, and I grabbed the emergency radio to hear words that made my heart race. Large tornado on the ground moving northeast toward Maple Ridge subdivision. That was where I lived. I had maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, to choose what from an entire life I could carry away. My hands shook as I hauled an old suitcase from a closet I had nearly forgotten I owned. I didn't pack for survival so much as for memory: Harold's and my wedding photo, Evan's baby pictures, my mother's pearl necklace, a stack of essential papers, a few pieces of jewelry, 43 years condensed into what would fit into one bag. The basement tasted colder than usual as I crouched in a corner, clutching Harold's worn sweater to my chest. Then the sound hit like a freight train, wood shattered, metal groaned. The house Harold had once been proud of groaned under forces stronger than nails and timber. And then, an absolute hush, so complete it made my ears ring. When I climbed the steps again my legs felt hollow, and where my living room had been there was simply open sky. My rose garden lay mangled as if something monstrous had whirled through it. The kitchen table where Evan had once done his homework was jammed into the garage wall, broken and absurd. I stood in the wreckage of everything I had known and, for the first time since Harold's funeral 8 years earlier, I wept. The next morning I walked the ruins with an insurance adjuster, a young man who might have been too young to rent a car, clipboard in hand, taking photos without once meeting my eyes. To him this was a job, to me it was my life. After the quick inspection he spoke 2 words that felt like a judge's sentence: total loss. I swallowed and asked what that meant, and he replied like a cashier reading a bill: "Your policy covers $120,000 on the structure. With depreciation and the deductible, you're looking at maybe $90,000, maybe less. $90,000 to replace 43 years. I stared at the broken rafters and thought, $90,000 won't bring back Harold's workshop, won't restore the roses or the dining room where birthdays were marked. It could not return the sense of safety that vanished in one violent hour. I thanked him by habit though he had handed me nothing but numbers. By the time Mrs. Patterson, my kindly neighbor, had helped me load the few surviving items into her car, I had accepted an awful truth: I had no home. 3 garbage bags of clothes, 1 battered suitcase of photographs, and Harold's old toolbox somehow unearthed from the debris. That was all I owned. When Mrs. Patterson dropped me off at a Walmart parking lot with my heart pounding, there was only one person left I could call: my son Evan. I prayed he would open his door. Evan lived 45 minutes away in Overland Park, a neighborhood of wide streets, manicured lawns, and houses so polished they looked like magazine spreads. Driving through felt like intruding into a world where trouble didn't exist. My car still smelled of mud and damp, and I felt like I carried wreckage into their immaculate bubble. The house had white shutters and a red front door Sloan, his girlfriend, had chosen, and I stood on that porch with my 3 bags at my feet, hesitating. Before I could knock, the door swung open and Evan stood there, tall and composed, wearing that guarded smile he uses in business meetings. Sloan appeared at his shoulder like she had stepped out of a catalog, blonde hair twisted into a perfect bun, white jeans and a silk blouse, watching the bags I carried as if they were curiosities. "Mom," Evan said, stepping back with that careful distance in his voice, and I set my bags down in their spotless entryway, suddenly self-conscious of the smell clinging to me, wet wood, mud, and the heavy scent of loss. "It's only temporary," I tried to explain. "Just until the insurance comes through and I find an apartment." Evan glanced towards Sloan, and in that silent language couples share, the answer was already decided. "Let's sit and talk," he said, guiding me into a living room so pristine it felt staged, a white sofa, glass tables, windows so clear they nearly vanished. I perched on the edge of a seat, careful not to scuff anything, while Evan leaned forward and spoke in a rehearsed tone. "Mom, we need to be honest." Sloan added softly, "We value our privacy. We work long hours. This house is our sanctuary." "It's not that we don't want to help," she said gently, "it's about space. You'd be more comfortable somewhere else, an extended stay hotel, maybe." Evan nodded and offered, as if closing a transaction, "I can help with a few $100 to get you started." Those words felt like a slammed door: not welcome here, not home. I left Evan's house with tears burning behind my eyes, refusing to let them fall until I could be alone. Mrs. Patterson's borrowed car rattled as I parked in the Walmart lot on the edge of town. The sun dipped low, painting the sky orange over shopping carts and flickering street lamps, and this was not a home but the only shelter I had. That first night I leaned the seat back, clutching Harold's toolbox as though it could protect me, and slept fitfully. Every time tires crunched or a security truck rolled by, I startled, terrified someone would see the 67-year-old woman living out of a car. By morning my neck ached, my clothes smelled stale, and I avoided the restroom mirror where I washed my face, because I couldn't bear to see what I had become. The second night was worse. My cash dwindled to less than $100, and I bought a gas station sandwich that tasted of cardboard and loneliness. I brushed my teeth in a McDonald's, avoiding the pity in strangers' eyes, keeping my pride like a fragile piece of china. By the third night, shame settled into my bones. I rifled through my purse for coins and found something else, a soft-edged, faded business card I had carried for decades. Graham Ellison, his name printed in blue ink, and beneath it, a phone number I wasn't sure still worked. On the back, in my teenage handwriting, 4 words I had written to myself: "Do not forget me." I stared at that card with my heart hammering and told myself it was absurd. Half a century had passed, and he had certainly built a life without me. Still, under the glare of a streetlight in that lot, I whispered his name like a plea. On the fourth morning exhaustion outweighed pride. I held the card with shaking hands and let myself dial the old number. It rang once, twice, and a deeper voice answered, familiar despite the years, Morrison Development. "This is Graham." My throat closed and for a second I almost hung up, but his tone, warm and steady, gave me courage. "Graham, it's Pauline." "Pauline Mercer," I said, and silence stretched so long I feared he did not remember. Then he said my name again, gently, like touching an old photograph, "Pauline." Words tumbled out of me before I could stop them. The house was destroyed. Evan did not want me with him. I had nowhere to go. I was in a parking lot in Tulsa, and I was sorry to trouble him after all these years. He interrupted me with a firmness that was kind. "Tell me where you are." "I'm coming now." I tried to argue and he would only repeat, "Pauline, give me the address." "I'm already walking to my car." 2 hours later a silver sedan eased into the lot, moving slowly between rows of vehicles, and my heart thudded when I recognized him as he stepped out. 50 years had silvered his hair and etched lines into his face, but his storm-gray eyes were the same, sharp and calm. He walked with a quiet assurance, scanning until his gaze found me, then tapped gently on my window and said, "Hello, Pauline." I rolled the window down, ashamed of my wrinkled clothes and weary eyes, and he looked at me with nothing but tenderness. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in days I felt a thread of safety. Graham loaded my 3 garbage bags and Harold's toolbox into his trunk as if they were treasures, opened the passenger door for me, and with deliberate, gentle motions left no space for argument. The drive felt unreal as we passed through rolling hills and neat neighborhoods until we turned through iron gates marked Prairie Creek Way. His driveway wound beneath tall oaks to a stone house with broad porches, elegant without being flashy, built to endure. He led me to the guest wing where the bedroom was larger than my old living room, the windows looking out over gardens, the bathroom boasting a deep soaking tub. I stood there awkwardly, afraid to touch anything. Graham only smiled and told me to make myself at home, "Pauline. This house has been too quiet for too long," he said. The first week I moved through the rooms like a guest walking on eggshells, but Graham was patient and gentle. Gradually we found a new cadence. Mornings became coffee on the porch while I watched finches dart at the feeders. Afternoons were spent wandering his grounds where he showed me a greenhouse filled with orchids. Evenings we cooked side by side in a kitchen that had room for laughter. He navigated the space with ease, yet when I made a pot roast from an old family recipe he proclaimed it the best meal he'd eaten in years, and hearing that appreciation warmed me in ways I had forgotten I needed. One night by the fireplace he told me he had once been engaged but called it off, and when I asked why he met my gaze and answered simply, "Because it wasn't you." For the first time since the storm, I found I could breathe. It did not take long for Evan to notice I was no longer calling from motels or shelters. One afternoon his name lit up my phone. "Mom, where are you staying?" "Miss Patterson said you left the extended stay place." I paused and said lightly, "With a friend." "A friend," he replied, disbelief clear in his voice. "You don't have friends with money." I swallowed the sting and said quietly, "You'd be surprised." From that moment his calls became more frequent, at first polite inquiries about my health, then questions that always circled back to Graham. What kind of business was he in? How long had I known him? Did he have investments in Kansas City? The curiosity felt less like concern and more like calculation. Sloane played her part with careful gestures, expensive candles, gourmet chocolates, a silk scarf, each gift accompanied by a handwritten card that read something like, "So happy you found love again. Hope we can start fresh." Each package felt like an offering with strings attached. At dinners, Evan reinvented himself as the grateful son, praising my sacrifices and my strength while his gaze kept drifting to Graham, measuring him like one might evaluate an investment. I sat across the table, listening as he recast past events to suit his present motives. Graham never confronted him directly in public. Instead, under the table he squeezed my hand with a steady reassurance that said plainly, "I see what's happening. You are not alone." One evening Graham told me he had invited Evan and Sloane for dinner and said with calm firmness, "It's time we clear the air." My stomach twisted as I wondered what he planned. When they arrived, Maria served a lovely meal and conversation hovered pleasantly until after coffee, when Graham leaned back and spoke with a composed clarity that left no room for evasion. "I want to talk about expectations," he began. "Evan, ever since your mother came to live here you've shown a new interest in her life. You ask about my business, my investments, my plans. But I remember the night Pauline had nothing and needed a place to stay. That night you and Sloane said you needed privacy. You called this house your sanctuary and closed the door on her." Evan flushed and muttered that it wasn't fair, but Graham's voice never wavered. "What is unfair," he said plainly, "is treating your mother as a burden when she's struggling and as an asset now that she's secure. If you want to be part of her life because you love her, you are welcome. But if your presence is motivated by what you think you might gain, you're wasting everyone's time." The room fell quiet. Sloane stared at her hands, lips pressed tight, and Evan sat without his practiced defenses. Graham's words drew a line in sand that finally put me in the center instead of the periphery. 6 months after the tornado, Graham asked me to marry him. There was no theatrical proposal, no ring slipped into champagne. One morning on the porch he took my hands and said softly, "Pauline, I don't want to spend another day without knowing you are my wife." I said yes, and we chose a quiet ceremony in his back garden. October's air was crisp, the trees brushed with gold, and the sky was clear as glass. I wore a simple blue dress that Graham said matched my eyes, and he wore a charcoal suit that made him look distinguished and steady. Our witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper who had become a friend, and Thomas, his longtime business partner. Inviting Evan was the hardest choice. I told Graham I wasn't sure, and he gently reminded me, "He is your son. You'll regret not giving him the chance." So I called him. "Evan, we're getting married on October 15th. You're welcome to come, but Sloane is not invited." His silence stretched so long I feared the call had dropped until he said, "Mom, you hardly know this man." I answered quietly, "I have known him longer than I knew your father before I married him." On the wedding day Evan arrived alone, polite and reserved, watching everything carefully. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, a lightness lifted from me I hadn't felt in decades. Those vows were honest rather than performative. Afterwards life found a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, mornings with coffee, afternoons in the garden, evenings by the fire. For the first time in years I found myself humming while preparing dinner. Each day my heart felt a little lighter. Evan began calling more often, and his tone shifted. Instead of questions about Graham's business, he asked about the roses, whether I joined a book club, how I was feeling. The conversations were shorter and less polished, but they were, finally, genuine. Perhaps it wasn't the closeness I once imagined, but it was honest, and honesty proved to be sturdier than a hollow performance. Sloane quietly vanished from the picture, no more gifts, no carefully worded notes, as if she decided that when she couldn't control the situation she would simply remove herself. I felt both relieved and sad that her connection to me had been so transactional. I began to see my son differently. He remained the child I had soothed through fevers and the young man I'd supported through college, yet he was also a person whose choices revealed his limits and flaws. I couldn't rewrite him, only accept what he chose to offer and protect the peace I had at last found. Looking back now, I understand the tornado in a new light. At first it seemed sheer devastation, tearing away everything familiar. But in time I realized it also cleared space for something unexpected. Losing the house taught me to tell the difference between what was load-bearing in my life and what was merely decoration. Love, dignity, and respect are the true supports. Sharing a life with Graham showed me that age does not bar new beginnings. He never regarded me as a burden or a broken woman. He saw someone worthy of being cherished. His steady presence reminded me daily that love isn't about spectacle or grandiose displays. It's about showing up, listening, and choosing one another over and over. With Evan, our relationship may never be perfect, but it is real now rather than a performance, and that alone is progress. I stopped measuring my value by how much space I fill in his life and began measuring it by the peace I feel within myself. The storm destroyed my old world but offered me a chance to build another, and sometimes, when you lose everything, you finally discover what you truly needed. If this tale touched you and gave you hope, please let me know where you're from. Tell me your city in the comments below.